All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Flame, and welcome to a special edition of the Master Motivation podcast. And it's a Wednesday. I have invited a special guest today, Mr. Herb Perez, and I'm just going to read your bio if you don't mind. Herb Perez was born in New York City to a Polish mother and Puerto Rican father. He attended Rutgers Law School. He did his undergraduate degree at William Paterson University and earned a master's degree in sport organization management from the International Olympic Committee's program at the University of Lyon, France. Perez became a city councilman and mayor for Foster City, California, where he is the owner of Gold Medal Martial Arts. He has earned his eighth degree black belt in Taekwondo. He has served as a chairman for the World Taekwondo Federation Education Committee and vice chair of the World Taekwondo Federation Technical Committee, along with Steven Capener. Together, they created and implemented the multi-tiered scoring system in place today, along with video review protocol. So, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I got to tell you, this is a little surreal for me in the way that we've met a couple times at the Super Show, but my very first memory of you actually is in my very first school. I had posters that were made by Century Martial Arts, and you were one of the posters that was on my wall.
Um,
This is well before I met you, and I'm like, looking at like thinking Olympic Taekwondo gold medalist, like super, super cool. So we're gonna get into talking about the Olympics and talking about your thoughts on that. And before I do that, though, would you mind just talking a little bit about your growing up and your background, please?
I was fortunate. I had a very loving family. Unfortunately, my mother and father didn't stay together. So when I was about 5 or 6 on Christmas Eve, my father was a lot abusive. So my mom kind of took us and ran on Christmas Eve, and then the rest is kind of history. So I lived in a pretty tough neighborhood, and I needed something to defend myself because, in fact, the first time I got into an altercation, my sister defended me, and then my mother made me go back outside into the courtyard in Kew Gardens, New York, and fight. And I didn't like fighting after that. Um, but then I read a book, and in reading that book, it was called The Son of the Flying Tiger, and I actually have a copy of it in my bedstand. I searched it down. There was a Taekwondo character in it that was outstanding and awesome. It was kind of based, it looked loosely based on Enter the Dragon. So I sought out Taekwondo schools. In the meanwhile, I took Bruce Tegner's books and taught myself what I could about
Hmm.
martial arts in general. Ran into a Taekwondo school when I was about 9. The instructor looked at me and said, "Oh, you're too short. Your hair is too long. You're not flexible. You'll never be any good." So I was like, "Thank you, sir. I'm 9." But he said, "Your mother's got to sign you up." So I said, "Well, she's downstairs." And so I took it downstairs, signed myself up, and the rest is history. Started to train with a number of individuals, but one of them was Master Anthony Alvarez. And he was a national champion in forms and second place in fighting. And then his instructor was Ki Chung Kim, who was a 1967 national champion in Taekwondo. And back then they didn't have world championships, but they had won the President's Cup, which is a pretty auspicious tournament. He was teammates with Dong Kun Park, who later went on to be one of my Olympic coaches. And over the years, I was exposed to amazing coaches and athletes. I went to Korea, lived and trained in their best university with their best coaches, and came back and won a bunch of stuff. But it was a tough upbringing in New York, tough where I lived, and we fought a lot because that was just the way you survived.
Right. Well, you brought it up. It sounds like you had a what I would think is a traumatic experience of having mom on Christmas Eve take
Yeah.
you and leave your father. How did that shape you as a man, and how did that affect you as a young boy?
So it's interesting because I think I'm not one of these people to lament much. It was just what it was, and so when I went into a martial arts school, that individual became my de facto role model as a male. So I had a lot of respect for him. He
Hmm.
was he was a man. When he said yes, yes. It was when it was no, it was no. There was no equivocation. And all of my instructors were like that. Anthony Alvarez was, Master Ki Chung Kim was. Then I was fortunate to train with Sifu Paul Vizio, the world's arguably best martial artist I've ever met. And he definitely, when he said no, it was no, and when yes, it was yes. But he was a principled man, as they all were. They had ethics and morals, and they subscribed to them, and they proscribed them and prescribed them for you. And so you had to, in order to be part of their world, you had to earn the right to either be accepted into the school, and if you wanted to be part of that inner circle of people that made it further down the road, you had to understand how that worked, and it wasn't always laid out for you. It was learned through acclimation, through enculturation, and they didn't tell you that's how it would go. You learned. There's a great book written by Tom Wolfe called The Right Stuff, and it was made into a movie about the
Hmm.
astronauts and how they became who they became as fighter pilots. And it was very much like that. You weren't told the rules. You learned the rules through making mistakes and doing and watching those above you. So it was a great, I mean, amazing relationship. They served as my fathers, more or less.
And having been in the martial arts more than 75% of my life now at this point, I have witnessed that so many times in young boys and young girls, that and we all feel that relationship with our instructor at some point, that they became either a pseudo father or a second father, as far as that role in life. You mentioned values, and in today's society, we see some of these things lacking. Men being men, or men being criticized for being men. What are your thoughts on that?
I think every generation of people criticizes the generation that comes after them for a number of reasons, and then I'd have to really think about this generation, because it has been a major departure from my generation. So the generation before me, these were the men that raised men and the women that raised men and women. And we were taught respect in a different way. Respect was expected, and if it wasn't given, it was dealt with. In this generation, I think one of the challenges has become, um, and I was a long haired music playing spandex feather in the air guy as well. And I played in bands and made a bunch of money and did all that kind of stuff. And people could look at me and probably say the same thing I'm about to say about some other people. So I don't get caught up in the aesthetics of it. What I get caught up in is the actual outcomes of it. What are the values? And
Hmm.
so one of the challenges I think now is that there is this me first kind of generation that's focused on us too. And what I mean by that is there's a focus on what makes me happy as an individual. How should I do my job? And should I have a healthy mental set? And uh, I laugh because we can't get employees, in any industry. Our industry is
Hmm.
clooning, and it's because they're more concerned about what days do I have off and when can. And so work has become kind of interesting. On the other side of it, I don't get caught up with the way you want to look and how you want to carry yourself, but I do get caught up in the mentality of disrupting or destruction for no reason, or cancel culture and all that kind of nonsense. I don't think there's a place for it. I think, take care of your business, affect those around you, take care of your life, is yourself, raise your children, raise your family, and then the rest will take care of itself. And if
Hmm.
it doesn't, bring it to attention. But this constant harassment of individuals that I see around us, some of it justified, some of it not, and the fear of people, of others, is not to my liking.
It is definitely a different time, and like you said, generation to generation.
Yeah.
I can remember, hearing my grandma tell me how things were, right, and then I hear my parents tell me how things were, and now I'm a father telling my kids how things were, and at the same time listening to my kids, and learning how to understand their thinking, right? Because I mean, when I was a young martial arts instructor, there was a certain way that I taught classes. When I became a father, my way of teaching changed dramatically because I saw it from a different side. So I think that the empathy and understanding of other people is really important as well, right?
I think that's true. And I think that we all change. I mean, when I was younger as an instructor, I taught the way my instructors taught me, and I taught the way that I thought teaching should be taught. And so I had a mentality that when I went to meet my instructor the first time, he didn't take me. When I went to meet Sifu Vizio, he told me he didn't have any classes.
Hmm.
Virtually every instructor I met, there was a process to be accepted. When I
Hmm.
first started to teach, I had a process. I would meet somebody, and if I thought they weren't a good fit for me, I would tell them the school was full. And then I digressed slightly from that, and my schools grew amazingly huge. Um, but then I realized during the pandemic that I had grown to such a degree, and I had a lot of members that, quite frankly, I didn't like, and they didn't have all the tenets of martial arts and what I would expect from somebody who was a student, loyalty, honesty, and all that. So now in my latest school, I've gone back in the other direction. My latest school is not all my locations, but certainly mine is an interview process with the parents first, interview the child next, an essay written by the child. At the end of that, I take a look at it, and if I think I'm going to recommend them for membership, I talk to my team and see if they agree. We then send them an offer, and they have 24 hours to accept the offer. And if they don't, that's okay. We won't take them in the future or now, and we move on to the next prospect. If we think that they're not a fit for my location, then we send them to our other location. If we think they're not a fit for us at all, we simply tell them we're not the right fit for you, and we will suggest other schools for them. In
Hmm.
addition to that, it's a year membership in advance, and it's $6,000 a year. And that's my school, because I've decided I don't want to I don't want to teach people that I don't want to teach. So if I think they're good for our organization, I'll put them with somebody else, but they may not be right for me. So I want to enjoy who I teach, and I want them to grow, and I want to share value with them.
And I think in the martial arts industry, and you could agree that that's a very unique approach. And I know that people coming into my school have the ability to change the culture, good or bad. And so what you're
Right.
saying is you want to make sure that you uphold the integrity of the culture of your school and what you're trying to pass down, because those students are
Right.
what represent us and continue to bring us those. I've seen through the pandemic this change in how students choose schools based on strictly the culture and sometimes the
Right.
beliefs and what's going on with COVID and all of those things. I mean, there are some students that are going to be with us and have the same morals, values, beliefs, and if they're not, it's probably not a good place for them to train with us, because it's only going to change our culture and in the end be a drain on everybody involved.
I, yeah, I think that's true. And I think one of the reasons for us is even simpler. So I'm going to exit that person now or within 6 months or a year. So if I find a person that doesn't match my culture, then I'm most likely going to not extend them a membership after a year anyway. They're going to be sad and bitter. I would rather that be better in the beginning
Hmm.
and simply say, you're not a good fit for us, or at least in my opinion, you're not a good fit.
Right.
My children go to great schools. Every time they go to a school, when they go to a school, we make a decision. We apply. 600 kids apply for 30 spots. They choose the kids they want. They have an essay process. They have an interview. They have a
Hmm.
parent visit to the school. They visit your home. They do all sorts of stuff. I'm an educational professional. And I think we should all treat ourselves like this. I saw an interesting conversation on Facebook. I think it was a Century site about, do you have contracts or not? And I'm like, absolutely. And the reason is I run a professional business. I'm a professional businessman. I pay my staff. I paid my staff throughout the entire pandemic, and I run professional facilities in nice areas, and I live in my neighborhoods. So if you want to live in our neighborhood, it's a certain amount of money to live here. It's a certain amount of money to do anything here. So
Hmm.
why would I treat myself any differently? And with all of us, we spend more time becoming professionals in what we do than a doctor spends becoming a doctor. I'm watching this Dr. Death documentary, and I'm fascinated with it. I spent more time becoming a martial artist than Dr. Death spent becoming a bad doctor. Um, so I think I learned a long time ago from someone I really liked at Macho, and she said, people will treat you the way you allow yourself to be treated. And so I've spent an amazing amount of time traveling, training, learning, growing, practicing my craft. I've achieved a certain level of athletic success. I've achieved a certain level of academic success, professional success, and societal success. That comes at a value and at a premium. And if you can't afford it, I understand that. And I travel on planes in a certain way. And if I couldn't afford it, I would travel a different way. I drive a certain car because that's the car I want to drive. Now, I don't have to drive that car, but if you want it, you'll pay for it. And it's the same with martial arts training. So I don't think any of us should ever feel bad expecting the same thing we expect from our members and our car dealerships expect for us. I lease my car. They expect me to pay for it for 3 years. I don't like it after a year or so or 2 years. That's my problem. I keep it for 3 years and then I get a
Mm-hmm.
new one. So it's an interesting thing because I think people get caught up in this. Oh, I'm a martial artist and I got to starve and be
Mm-hmm.
Musashi on the hill. And I'm like, no, no, you don't. That's a personal choice, and you devalue our industry. I went for Thai food the other night, and I can go for cheap Thai food, and they use cheap ingredients, and they use cheap marinades, and they choose cheap meat. I went to a really nice Thai food place with Mike Swain. He picked up the check this time for once, and I know it was expensive, but it was delicious, and that's the Thai place I like to go to because it's delicious. It's great. It's great
Right.
ingredients, great food. So never feel bad about what you charge for your services. Just make sure you're providing the best you can provide.
Well, one of the questions that I often ask school owners that have a hard time with, charging this or charging that, is, if you ask someone, if I wanted to buy your black belt, how much would you sell it to me for? And
Right.
I mean, you can almost, you can't even put a dollar amount on that. So when you look at the end product, and if you're able to relay that even early on, I think people are more than willing to pay for value, than
Right.
just, obviously kicking and punching, right? So,
I,
hey,
yeah.
quick shout out.
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say, hey to, Mr. Cox is watching, Mark Cox and Josh Arsamont. Thank you guys for tuning in. By the way, if you guys have any questions for Mr. Perez, please drop them in the comments, and we'll address that. But I cut you off, Mr. Perez. So you were.
Well, I over the years when I worked with Century, I owned a video production company, so we filmed some of the greatest minds in the business world for martial arts. And one of the things that I learned during that point in time from a lot of them, people can afford your services. They're making a choice on what they buy. They buy
Mm-hmm.
$4 Starbucks. They go out to dinner. They go out to lunch or whatever. They can
Mm-hmm.
afford your services. The question is, do they want to? So if you
Right.
provide them with a value that they understand, they'll pay for them. And Grandmaster Clark, I went down and I wanted to speak to him and Frank and a few of these other guys. So I went down to Florida and I went to one of Master Clark's events. And so he's talking to his program director, and I'm going to apologize if I'm overstepping my boundaries with him, but he said something to that person that during this seminar that I really learned a lot from. He said, when you're signing up somebody as a program director, you're saving their life. And when he said that, that was profound. And he said, so how many times would you reach into an ocean or throw somebody a life preserver before you gave up on them? And when he said it that way, that was profound because he's right. When I teach a student or you teach a student or any of us teach a student, we are the difference between that person's life succeeding and failing. I've had kids that have come through my program that go through Harvard, Yale, whatever, and it's because of what they learned in my school, the tenacity, the perseverance, the determination, the patience. They have role models in front of them that they can talk to when they have challenges. So we are providing lifesavers and life preservers for parents. So at that point, I couldn't possibly pay the people that have helped me in my life for what they've done for me. There's not enough money in the world. The only thing that I have back to give to them is my loyalty and my recollection and always constant reminder of what they did for me. And from time to time, I'll call up people that have helped me just randomly and thank them because I haven't taken a moment to go back and say, you don't understand what you meant to me. So I've had a lot of individuals in my life that mean a lot to me and have
Mm-hmm.
done a lot for me. So I think it's important that that's the legacy we carry on.
For sure. And, this whole podcast was created in an effort for me to recognize many of the people that have somehow inspired me or motivated me along the way. And I agree with you 100%. It's always important to continue the legacy, continue to give back for what you were given. And I think that we see in the martial arts that is often lost very quickly. People
Yeah.
have short memories when it
Yeah, it's
comes to that
okay.
because I mean, I look back and my parents could not afford martial arts, and
Right.
without my instructor giving my father the opportunity to to do work or to trade and to allow me to train, because here I am on a podcast with you, which I probably would never have this experience, without that very first moment.
Right.
Becoming a consultant with Maya and
Right.
all of the experience that I've had, it all starts from that very beginning. And without that moment changes everything. So I agree with you 100% and think that is very important.
Yeah.
I hope that my students understand that. I hope that they feel the same way and look forward to that.
All you can do is set the example for them. So if you set the example for them, then they should. And I think that, Frank Silverman and I have a great relationship for a lot of
Hmm.
reasons, none of which I'll um, talk about here. But what I can say is this: based on our relationship and things that we have mutually done for each other over the years, there has not been a time that I've ever called him when I needed something that he hasn't provided it as a resource, and there has never been a time when he's called me that I haven't provided it for him. And that's based on a martial art relationship and a friendship, but not solely just a friendship, but it was in part started with martial arts and what we did because we thought it was important to do for the right reasons. And I think too often people forget that there are things you need to do simply because they're right to do without any expectation of reward. I spoke about Master Clark, and there's another gentleman, Sergio Van Schmeling, down that
Hmm.
way. And I've asked them for advice and help over the years. And these are individuals that, without anything, without any compensation or recompensation, they have helped me. And Frank goes in that. David Wall from Century, Mike Dillard from Century, amazing men in my life that have helped me with advice. And on a personal side, every instructor I mentioned, there was a time when I couldn't pay, and they still trained me. They uh, they let me train. They helped me. They wrote those letters that I needed to go to Korea. And there are many people in my life that I've had like that I remember when I help others, and we help others because that's simply what we do and what we should do, as opposed to doing it because we want a banner somewhere.
Right, right. Let's talk about your martial arts training coming up. Your martial arts training that led you to compete in the Olympics and win a gold medal.
So, in general, what happened to me was I started competing in New York City, and in New York, they had there were three types of tournaments. There were karate tournaments, which were um, either light contact or no contact with kicking to the face. Um, and there were actually karate tournaments in New York in Connecticut, where you couldn't touch somebody. And I got disqualified for body contact, which I always found kind of funny. Then there were Taekwondo tournaments that were point tournaments where you could kick people in the face. You could punch people in the face. You just couldn't draw blood. And you could kick as hard as you wanted to the body without chest protectors or anything. And then there were the Olympic style Taekwondo tournaments, which were not what you see now, but full contact to the body with kicks and punches, full contact to the face with kicks, and knockouts were allowed. So when I started, I went to a tournament pretty quickly. I was a yellow belt, and I took fourth place in my first tournament, and then started to just win and win and win in every division. But literally every division I went into, I won fourth, then first. And I had a great senior who helped me and brought me around to tournaments because I wasn't driving yet, Mark Williams, who was an amazing competitor. And back then, the pinnacle tournament that you could win, that the greats had won, like Jerry Robbins, Mike Warren, and Chuck Norris, and guys like this, was the Henry Cho All American. So we all aspired to fight inside the arena in the ring, because when you were younger, you were put out in the rotunda in the glass. So the homeless people and the bums would watch you in the outside walking through Madison Square Garden. And then as you got higher in rank, you started to move inside. So they'd see you. And then finally, When you're a red belt, you're right outside the ring, and black belts fought in the ring. So I was fortunate enough to win the grand championship there, and my school, I think, won it more than any other school. Mark Williams, myself, Keith Kelly, Kevin Padilla, to name a few. We all won the divisions, all our divisions, and we won the grand championship. I retired from that competition because I started to fight internationally for the U.S. team in '86. And then I didn't fight in it any longer. I just fought internationally. But I came up where I was fighting 50 tournaments a year. So I would fight on at least once a weekend or twice a weekend. I would go down and fight. I fought in Kiwan Kim's tournament. Then I drive up to Pennsylvania, sleep in a parking lot, wash my uniform because I only had one in a laundromat, and then go fight in another tournament with the trophies from the first one in the car. And so we fought back then everywhere, anyone, all the time. And my seniors, were great fighters. Mark Williams was an amazing fighter, and he dragged us all around. But those were rough tournaments. I mean, you'd fight sometimes in the tournament, and then you'd fight outside the tournament, or you'd be, I had been in a bunch of riots in tournaments, in karate tournaments especially, because Taekwondo guys would show up at that tournament, and there was always a ruckus. And then there would be fights in the ring and outside the ring, or while you were in a ring, that a fight would start. So you'd have to
Wow.
watch the guy you were fighting, and then there'd be a guy behind you who might hit you. So
Huh.
I had seen that happen, well, more times than I care to mention. So it was nice to finally make it to the National Olympic level, because then I just had to worry about the Koreans who were cheating in the ring and the referees who were cheating or not scoring properly. So instead of fighting like everybody, at least you knew exactly who the enemy was. So
Right.
it took a long time for that to be fixed, and quite frankly, that's where we find ourselves now, is dealing with the cheating in a different way.
Yeah. What was, I mean, so training for the Olympics and the experience of competing in the Olympics and then winning, just describe how that felt to you, what that meant to you.
So you train. What happens in the beginning is you don't know exactly how to train, so you're training what you think training is. Then I was fortunate that a national team member took notice of me and let me come out to train with him in Montana. And I made a really dear friend, Dr. Steven Capener, who was training there as well. And I went there, stayed in his room, and trained there, and learned how to train like a U.S. team member. That same year, I decided that the best in the world here were only winning bronze medals. So I decided I would go to Korea. So I got a letter of introduction and went to Hanguk Chede to learn how to train properly. And so I was at the best university with 45 of the best players in the world, 4 or 5 in each division, because I had the best players, best coaches. And I was fighting every day, training 4 days a week, 4 times a day, 6 days a week. And even on the day off, they did something. So
Hmm.
I was put in that pressure cooker, came back though, won the nationals. Then I won the Pan Ams, won the Pan Am gold, won the world championship, had 6 gold medals internationally in a row. And probably should have had a gold medal at the '87 Worlds too, but it wasn't meant to be. I took a bronze. So that's the kind of pressure cooker you put yourself in. And it was a full contact sport. You fought 6 or 7 matches in one day, 3 3-minute rounds. So you had to be physically tough, and you had to be a fighter, because there was no way you're going to make it through it. So the training in Korea and the coaches I had there, in addition to Sifu Vizio here, the world champion in kickboxing, are the reason I was successful, because they taught me the technique, they taught me the mental fortitude, they taught me the right mindset and how to overcome, despite what was going on, anyone and everyone that was fighting, and that's how you prevail. And I don't believe that people. I don't people under. I think the story I'll share is this. So when you come back from the Olympics, just like I would have, everybody tries to grab that person and talk to them about how they did what they did, or tell them their story. And their story is, I want to go to the Olympics. I want to win. I'm going to do anything, everything. Tell me what to do. And then you start to tell them. And then there's this eye thing that happens. Their eyes start to change and they're kind of looking around nervously. And the word comes out of their mouth that can't come out of the mouth, and it's but. And I call it the but word. But I have to do this, but I have to do that. At the moment where you say but, then you're not going to win, because the reality is there's someone else around the world who's going to do everything humanly possible and necessary to win. When you say the word but, or you make an excuse with the word but, then you're going to lose, because you're simply not going to do enough. So the difference between the winners and the losers are the people that say but. And you can't say but. So that means there's an amazing amount of sacrifice that you had to do back then. And quite frankly, even now, the players have to travel and amass points in all these different events. They have to figure out how they're going to get there, how they're going to raise money. USA Taekwondo is more corrupt than it's ever been, and the individuals running it are corrupt, and they're running it as a private club. And so the people that actually, if you really want to make an Olympic team, you have to go out by yourself, win all the opens despite the organization, so that you are named by name one of the top 6 in the world. And then there's nothing they can do, because then you're going because you won the spot. I've heard too many stories about athletes here who aren't chosen, so they go to other countries to fight. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, like we were talking pre-interview, just your frustration. I'm sensing it now as more we talk about this. What were the pivotal moments that made these changes? Like what happened differently from when you were training and now? And I mean, just give us your thoughts overall on the performance at the most recent Olympics.
So you'd have to go back a few years, and there was a point in time when you couldn't possibly win a championship against a Korean. And that was because the Korean referees cheated. And there were Korean referees here in this country that cheated. I don't want to embarrass them by naming them, but they came up to me after the Olympics, a few of them, and actually apologized, because I was a victim of it for a while. They had such a desire for their students to win or their people to win that they just cheated. So that was one level. Second level of it, and there's actually a lot of articles about this in Korea on how they did it. And one of the most respected people in the world in Taekwondo told them how they did it. So they called it pruning the tree. So if you were a player who was good early on, they would fix the match so that you never made it to Korea. You would lose early to somebody else. But if you did make it to Korea, they would tell the refs that guy doesn't win no matter what. The second level, though, was countries themselves. You can imagine if you were a country and the only person you had ever seen do Taekwondo was Korean, your instructor was Korean. So when you were judging or refereeing, you would wait to see the Korean win, because that's like watching Mike Tyson fight Buster Douglas. I watched that fight. I was waiting for Mike Tyson to win. I wasn't waiting for Buster Douglas to win. Well, he won. Now you watch that fight and you're like, oh my God, he was beaten pretty badly the whole fight. So there's that unintentional bias and prejudice because of your experience with Taekwondo. I think the sadder part was the endemic just pattern of the way it was handled over the years. So as a result of that, they embarrassed themselves at the Olympics so badly with the cheating, kind of like the boxing debacle in Seoul. We had our moment in Taekwondo where the countries were watching it. It was 2004, 2008, and they just had enough. They watched this guy from France who was good, and France is a very powerful Olympic country, get cheated for the Korean, just out and out cheated. And at the end of that, this is when I was on the technical committee, because it had happened to an American as well. So we filed an arbitration against them. And in exchange for the arbitration, they said they would do reforms. So we were part of the reform team. I was on their technical committee, and I was the chairman of their education committee. And then Dr. Steven Capener and I created the multi-tiered point system. But it had video review by a world-class athlete and a referee. So if a referee made a bad decision, it would come back to the review table. We would review it in real time and fix it or not fix it. Out of 100% of the things that came back to us for a review, 80% were overturned. We reversed the call. One of the most significant was Korea was fighting against Mongolia in the women's division, and I was the center ref. I was not the ref, I was the center athlete in that one. And I had to overturn the call. And and that was the last time they used athletes in that chair. That was it. After that, they took that away. Now, the easiest solution was to fix the cheating and bad referees. That was the easiest solution. Instead, they came up with an electronic scoring system that doesn't work, simply doesn't work, because it can't tell the difference between a technique or a slap or a non-technique. When a referee scores, just like you would in any sport, they can tell the difference. You could imagine if a basketball hoop simply had a counter, and if the ball goes in the hoop, no matter what, it's a point, and you can't contest it. Same thing in Taekwondo. If it goes up on the scoreboard, can't contest that fact. It's electronic. Well, what if the guy spits on the chest protector and it scores? They had a fault in the chest protector where if you put your hand, if you wet your hand and you put it on a chest protector and you put your foot on the chest protector without contact, it made enough contact to score a point. Can't overturn it. Let's say you fell on the floor and it made a point. Can't overturn it. So the problem is the easiest solution was to fix the cheating and the lying and the incompetent refereeing. But they just didn't. So when you watch the ridiculousness of the tournaments now, it's based on this idea they just can't. And it's a cultural thing, because if you look at the history of Korea, it has punishment, not reward. And so if somebody does something wrong, in ancient times, they beat their feet. They did all this stuff. They didn't reward success. They punished bad behavior. You can imagine in basketball, if you didn't have a 3-point, you want to see more exciting basketball? You put a 3-point line. Guys shoot longer. You don't have guys under a basket doing layups. You're going to see more cool stuff. You put a 24-second clock, you're going to see cool stuff. You have a 3-second rule, you're going to see more cool stuff. So you reward good behavior. So when Steve and I came up with this, the idea was you do a spinning kick, certain amount of points. You do a jump spinning kick. You do something like gymnastics that has a difficulty, you get more points. It could be even simpler, because if you wanted to fix the chest protector thing, they have the ability to sense power, and it's a martial sport. If it's a sport and it's based on power and damage, the harder you hit something, the more points you get, because it's more damage, like a video game. The 20-20 armor by this guy, Ali Ghafoor, is the best system. More power, it's like a video game, it goes down. Now you don't have to worry whether it's a good technique, because you can't make power without a good technique. So it's part of the solution. You just have to allow the referees to interject into the game when there's bad technique or whatever. Now they do to a certain degree now, but they don't trust the refs because they just don't trust themselves. Now, boxing, if you watch boxing in the Olympics, it went back. It tried electronic scoring. It didn't work. So this Olympics, it went back to a 10-point must system. And what they said to the refs were, you cheat, you're gone. You're incompetent, you're gone. Judo doesn't even allow a ref to do that level of tournament unless they've been at that level. So judo doesn't have, when I looked around the Olympic arena or World Championship or even the National Championship, I'm looking at the people refereeing me. They don't even understand what Taekwondo is. They were in some dojang, they stayed around long enough. They couldn't fight and they became referees. Now they're going to judge a world-class competitor? I don't think they can't even understand what we're trying to do, let alone score it.
Right.
So anyway, that's my diatribe on that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it, and I for those of you that are watching, you're learning a little bit more from the inside, because we most of us are watching from the outside, just either we appreciate it or we don't, but we don't really understand the inner workings of it. But let's talk a little bit more about success after that, and or at least what I would consider success. You went on to do a few more things after that. Of course, still running your schools, but one of the things that I remember was you did the WMAC Masters series.
Oh, the WMAC Masters was amazing fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you were in there with a couple notable martial artists, and just talk about that experience just a little bit.
WMC Masters was an interesting opportunity because I had just gotten back from the Olympics, and I was offered to fight in the first UFC championship. I was offered WMC Masters, and I was offered to do a movie, and I was offered to do Mortal Kombat. I was in law school at this point, and so I said no to everything for different reasons. And I said no to WMAC Masters, and then they called me and asked to meet me. So I went in there for about 4 hours to New York City to meet them, and they talked me into it. The funny thing was, um, I'm like, I don't need it. I'm busy. I'm in law school. And then they're like, well, we're going to make an action figure. I'm like, action figure? All right, I'm in. So I did. And then it was a great experience because I didn't know any of the guys in it. I knew of them. And then when I got to meet them, I had an amazing opportunity to learn a lot about these guys who were, in my opinion, the best in their craft. So a guy like Richard Brandon, he's passed away, but he was an amazing martial artist. Hakeem Alston, amazing individual, crazy successful now. Larry Lamb, crazy successful, crazy good martial artist. Mike Bernardo, Johnny Lee Smith, Jamie Webster, Willie DeBam. These were all, and Chris Casamassa, these were all NASCAR guys, Christine Banyan Rodriguez. And they were all point fighters in a different arena that I didn't fight in. They were all very talented martial artists, and quite frankly, probably could have went on to win the Olympics. Those guys kind of probably won the Taekwondo Olympics this year, even now. But they were amazing martial artists. We had an amazing opportunity to be baby movie stars for 3 years, and we got to enjoy that level that we really deserved to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the show was mismanaged by the upper management to a certain degree. Otherwise, it would still be around. But it was an amazing opportunity to work with amazing and talented athletes, and I had the good fortune to meet up with them, a bunch of them over the years again, and they're just doing. Most of them are doing great, all of them, I think, and they're on their own personal journeys. Some of which involve TV stunts, some of them involve some airtime. But it was a generation. We're fortunate because usually every generation only gets one martial artist. There was Bruce Lee, before him was Sonny Chiba, Fumio Demura. After that was Chuck Norris, followed by, I don't know, who would you say, but Jason Statham should have been the guy from the Iron Chef, the DeCosco's kid, but must have angered somebody. Brandon Lee passed away too soon. And now, I mean, you got Jet Li. What's the other guy? Jackie Chan. We don't have anyone right now.
Mm-hmm.
The guy from the Thai guy could be the guy, Tony Jaa, but we don't have anybody right now with that one generation of charisma. On the TV show, we had 20 guys and women that potentially could have been that guy. And it didn't happen for whatever reasons, but and in part probably because the industry's changed. But it would be nice to see who that next person would be.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely an interesting series. I remember watching it, and coming up in the martial arts, a lot of kids were watching it, and
Yeah.
anything that gets kids more excited about the martial arts, whether it was that or it was the Karate Kid, then the Ninja Turtles. Now you got Cobra Kai. It's just always something that kind of feeds it a little bit.
Cobra Kai, I love that show. I'm friends with Sean Kanan, who was in Karate Kid 3, I think. Really interesting guy, crazy successful in his personal life, on a different level, from Pennsylvania, I think. He was a nice guy. Cobra Kai, anything that brings attention to us as martial artists. There have been a few recent attempts that I'm not sure have done a great job of it, like the latest Kung Fu incarnation. But certainly, Kung Fu Panda, Ninja Turtles, anything that brings the story and the value of what we do to the forefront helps martial arts school kids get better. And Cobra
Mm-hmm.
Kai, to a certain degree, does that. And I think that's great. The unfortunate thing is, as an industry, that's where we should be focused. So if I were Maya or Century or one of the big dogs, I would be trying to figure out what that next vehicle is that's
Mm-hmm.
going to invigorate the business so that we can have more people in dojos, in dojos, in schools, in kwans and kwoons, because that's ultimately what we need. If you're a soccer organization, you want a World Cup. If you're a football organization, you get a Super Bowl every year. And so next Next level football my kid plays, that's in a large part because they watch football, right? So we
Hmm.
don't have that constant access to the public, and we're better at it. Not every sport has a Bill Walsh or John Wooden, right? We have in every school a motivational life coach. If you
Hmm.
bring your kid to my martial arts school, you won't hear a parent talking about how I made their kid an Olympian. You'll hear my parents talking about the life skills that I taught their children that sent them to college. And we do that the minute they walk in the door. They don't necessarily do that on a basketball court, and they don't do
Hmm.
that on a soccer field.
Right. You glossed over this real quick, and I want to touch on it. You said that when you came back from the Olympics, you had the choice of the UFC came calling, and you had WMAC Masters, and you had these other things, but you mentioned the UFC. Uh, why did you not do the UFC, and what are your thoughts on the UFC now?
This is going to sound, horribly not humble, arrogant. I was the Olympic gold medalist. I was the only American to win an Olympic gold medal. My value of my medal and my performance was way more important than the UFC. The UFC, it's not an Olympic gold medal. And back then, nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew anybody in it. The only people we had heard about a little bit were the Gracies, a little bit. And so I said, they sent me a note, and they said, there's this thing and they want you to fight in it. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, it's called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So I said, well, what are the rules? And he said, well, there aren't any rules. I said, what do you mean there aren't any rules? So he says, well, you can't bite or eye gouge. I go, how much money? And so he says, well, 10,000. I said, how much if I win? He says, 10,000. I go, what? I said, I wouldn't even think about it for less than X, and if I win, I want this much. I said, give me the names. So they tell me the names. I said, I've never heard of any of these people except tangentially the Gracies. I said, so yeah, I'm going to pass. And then after the first one, I watched it. And I was glad I passed because it had like this huge sumo guy from Newark, New Jersey. Then it had a couple of other guys that I actually knew from different countries. So then they called me because the commentators in the first one did such a horrible job. They wanted me to commentate the second one. And the guy that I was there with was Brian Killermy. And he was a crazy good announcer. And at this point, I think I was doing WMAC Masters. And I think it was in Colorado, the second one. So they asked me to do the second one. So I show up and I'm like, they're talking in my ear, and I didn't have enough experience. So I ended up doing the commentating in number two.
Mm.
I did the color commentating because Brian Killermy, who's now on Fox News, this guy was crazy good. So I look at him and I go, man, I don't know. Why didn't they ask you to do this? And he goes, I don't know. So I told the producer, I said, listen, why don't you have Brian do the commentating with Jim Brown, and I'll do the color. So I ended up doing the color in that one. And that one was crazy too. This is back when UFC was a circus. I mean, it wasn't whatever. But I kind of had a plan on what I would do if I did fight in it. And I had a strategy, what I would do. And then how I would tap out if I didn't work and and take my money and buy a new car. But to be honest, back then there's an interesting intrinsic value of being an Olympic gold medalist that is can't be tarnished. When you're an Olympian, period, people are just they're fascinated with it. And they don't even ask you what the color, they don't even ask you about a medal. You just say, oh, I went to the Olympics, and they're like, oh my gosh. So the
Right.
Olympics themselves carry such a high value that when you do anything else other than it, you really have to think, do you really want to do that? So if you're Bruce Jenner and you want to turn into Caitlyn Jenner, you got to think about that a little bit. If you're a wrestler and you're going to go into the WWF, you want to think about that a little bit because the value and the mark of the Olympics and an accomplishment in it is such an amazing accomplishment when you think about it, regardless of the sport, that you don't want to diminish it. Like these individuals that went to the Olympics for karate, which by the way was way more fun to watch than Taekwondo and better. Um, they'll be the only Olympians for karate ever. There's not going to be another crew, at least for um, 12 years or so if they get back in the Olympics. So that value, those Olympians, they shouldn't devalue it by doing things that are not worthy of the mark. So
Hmm.
that's kind of one of the reasons I didn't do it. I wouldn't do it now at all, and I wouldn't suggest anybody do it now for a different reason. It is a very serious and dangerous endeavor of which we don't know what the results are 20 years from now.
Right.
So, you see some of these guys that I met back then, and you take a look at them now, and it's done an amazing job of their bodies. Um, I'm not sure that the rules. I'm not a fan of the rules. I'm not a fan of the bravado. I'm not a fan of the tattoos. I'm not a fan of the aesthetic. But I will say this: it kind of puts everybody else to shut up mode because Taekwondo puts on chest protectors, and we were tough guys, and they're like, oh, you got to wear a chest protector because you're protecting yourself. You don't need a chest protector. These guys get full on kicked in the body, punched in the body, kneed in the body,
Yep.
and no chest protector. By the way, they're not wearing headgears and they're barely wearing gloves,
Right.
and they're getting hit in the face with elbows. You elbow me in the face, I'm on the floor and cry like a little schoolgirl. I'm gonna quit. So those guys are incredibly tough. They're amazing athletes. They have taken all the nonsense out of martial arts. So if you're doing tiger claw, chicken beak, lizard tail, and you try that in the arena, you're going to get killed. But they have come up with new ways to hurt people that, I mean, I'm fascinated with what they do. And a lot of my great friends are doing jujitsu at a very high level since then. I just
Hmm.
didn't because I didn't have any interest. My idea of a fun Saturday is not rolling around with another guy's butt in my face, choking me or trying to break my arms. So I like Taekwondo better.
Well, you
That's
struck
not
a
a
chord.
not a commentary on jujitsu because I know a lot of my good friends love it and they're doing it at a high level. But
Yeah.
my sport I like to do it about 6 feet away from each other.
I gotcha. I gotcha. You struck a chord with me in bringing up another Olympian, Kurt Angle, went to
Oh,
the WWE. What are your so you talked about diminishing? Do you think that by going to the WWE that he took away from his gold medal, or do you think that that enhanced his overall, not just persona, but his accomplishments?
I don't know him, so I would never speak poorly about another individual's life choices and especially an Olympian at that level and a guy who's really tough. He made a choice to become a performer, and that's his choice. And I don't have anything bad to say about it other than he made a life skill choice. He made a life decision, which was I'm sure he's making crazy good money in a crazy big way. And there are a couple of people that have done it. I mean, Ronda Rousey, didn't she do it for a while? And
Yeah. Uh huh.
she's she's I wouldn't fight Ronda Rousey for any money in the world. She's one of the toughest women I know. So I mean, there are really tough guys that do it, and they do it to become entertainers. So I'm not going to say that that's a good or a bad thing. I think that you make choices on how you want to make a living, and if that's how you want to make a living, who am I to say that it's a bad way? I liked wrestling when I was a kid, WWF or whatever it was called back then, WWW maybe. I don't remember what it was called, but it was I watched Chief Jay Strongbow and guys like this back in the day,
Yep.
and I probably threw myself around a little bit. It's entertainment and it's physically challenging and dangerous. So don't underestimate that. I'm just saying that as an Olympian, if you go into the UFC, carry yourself as an Olympian. Speak
Right.
as a martial artist. It's not about I can kick your whatever. I'm going to do this to your family and your wife. As tough as he is, I don't have a lot of respect for one of the individuals that continues to diminish his opponents and their families. I don't think that, I don't want my kid watching that. I don't want that to be my kid's role model.
Right. Well, that's been a criticism for a long time as far as the UFC versus martial arts because not only does sometimes the sport aspect take away from some of those values, but the showmanship. I mean, let's face it, most of these guys have taken lessons from the WWE on how to cut a promo and how to sell tickets, right? So maybe it's not even exactly who they are or what they are. They're just trying to promote.
I
Just my
could,
thought.
you could, I, yeah, I get that, but that's a life choice. So
Sure.
I have ability. Listen. I could turn myself into the Cobra Kai of my area, right, and be like, we're the badasses and we can do this, we can do that, and yada, yada, yada. And I can sell tickets to, come to my gym because we can beat everybody up. We just do, listen, you got to be happy with the life choices you make. So for me, I have young children. I raise young children. So I teach other people's children. So I try
Hmm.
to carry myself in a way. There are a lot of ways to distinguish yourself. I decided to distinguish myself athletically. I follow the Platonic school of the Republic for distinguishing yourself. Do your best academically, do your best philosophically, do your
Hmm.
best socially, do your best, I say athletically. So if you, art wise, music. So I'm a musician, I'm a philosopher, I'm a fighter, and I'm an
Hmm.
academic, and I did my public service. So I have completed the five things that I need to feel complete about, and I've done them in a way which serves as a role model for myself, for my children, for my families that I choose to patronize me, and I choose to teach. So, but those are personal choices.
Of
I'm not
course.
saying that you shouldn't or should. That's up to you. If you want to call yourself the Dragon Temple of Killers and put a sign up and that's what you're selling to your community, God bless you, good luck. My school is called Gold Medal Martial Arts because it represents a gold medal ideal. We're focused on excellence. We have a slogan. It says excellence is earned. That's our
Hmm.
slogan. And then my new location is called Peak Performance, and that's because that's where we're headed. You want to come to that location? Don't come unless you want to be a peak performer and be willing to do what's necessary.
Right. Right. You just mentioned something, and we've got about less than 5 minutes that I want to touch on. You talked about service to your community, which is something that's really near and dear to me. I'm very active and involved in our community with our Chamber of Commerce and many of the people that I work with, City Council, School Board, and just volunteering, whether it's Rotary or Kiwanis or whatever we're
Yeah.
doing in our area. What led to your decision to become a city councilman and go on to become mayor? I know how that works sometimes, just so you know,
Yeah.
because sometimes you just slide into that spot or you get somewhat thrust into that spot. So, what was your experience with that in your community?
What happened to me was I was on the Olympic Board of Directors, the executive committee. I worked with the Olympic Council of Asia and their board. I had developed a skill set early on in my life that was nonprofit governance. I came to this community, saw an opportunity to own a school, right away joined the Chamber of Commerce, helped them, did some other stuff. Um, and then we had a beautiful school on the water. And there was this one resident across the way that was complaining about the noise of the children. He didn't like the noise of the children. And I
Hmm.
was like, well, he had just moved there and we had been there already 4 or 5 years. So I said, did you look out the back of your house over the water and see our school and see Chevy's next door? I said, what
Hmm.
about the noise from Chevy's with people drinking and carousing until 10 o'clock at night? He says, oh, I don't mind those noises. I just don't like the sound of children. So the city council at that point handled that situation so poorly that I decided to run for the council. And I asked them, they said, well, we don't think you're ready yet. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, is there somebody better? They said, no. They said, but we just don't think you've been here long enough. So I said, okay, I'm going to run anyway. I ran and I did a good race. I lost by about 200 votes, but they were so mean spirited in their attacks on me that I decided to run a presidential campaign the next time. And so you would have thought President Obama was running. And I had this amazing campaign and I won by a ridiculous amount of votes and sat on the city council for 8 years and made a lot of changes. Um, and they actually prevented the sitting council at that point, they violated their own rules and tried not to make me mayor. So then I made sure I ran for mayor and became mayor. But they rallied late in my career. I got an extension of another year. Then they rallied to kill me. And so I realized I'm not a great politician. I'm great at getting stuff done. I did some amazing stuff. I made smoking illegal in our town. You can't smoke outside anywhere in our city, nowhere.
Hmm.
And I was very proud of that. We built a levee we needed, raised a bunch of money. When I came on the council, they had $8 million in the bank. When I left, they had $110 million in the bank.
Huh.
So now there are other people running it. I don't speak poorly about them. They do what they do. I would helped a couple of them get elected, and then there's some horrible ones that are on there now. But all you can do is serve as you serve. I was fortunate to serve. I'm not a good politician because a great politician doesn't say what they think or feel. The other ones say exactly what they think or they feel, and that's me. So I tend to lead things for a while, and then I get killed on the way out.
Well, I can understand that disdain
Oh yeah,
for politics.
yeah,
But at the
I'm
end of the day, when you see that something needs to get done, I mean, either you're going to step up and lead as we are, I think, born to do because
yeah,
of what we do. We just have to get things done, and then it's time to move on. I mean, you're not able to change the entire world, but you can change one little bit at a time. And
yeah.
so it sounds like you made a really big
We
difference
we
in your
we
community.
we did what was necessary. When we fired under my watch, I got rid of a bad city manager, a bunch of bad employees, and hired a bunch of great ones. So we fixed a lot of things, and you got to have the courage to do that because
Yes.
there's one thing about public service on the private side with the guys that work for you, they love that job, and it's hard to get them out once they're in, especially if they're not doing their job. So we had a
Yep.
guy here not doing his job, Jim Hardy. He had fell asleep at the wheel and he was asleep for 6 years. By the time I got there, he had been there 20 years. We removed him, and we got better people. And so and that's when the city went from 8 million to 110 million. So we did what was necessary. Um, and it is what it is. But I'm not going to be president of the United States. I'm probably not going to be president of the World Taekwondo Federation. I'm definitely not going to run USA Taekwondo, because I've done a lot of work in those, and I led from behind. But I do realize that I'm not a great politician, and you probably wouldn't want to work for me because I'm a hard taskmaster. So, it's hard for me to get school owners.
Sounds like we should hang out a little bit more often. Uh, hey, listen, we're at the end of our time, and I just want to thank you so much for the conversation. Has been great. I mean, you have an amazing story and amazing experiences, and I hope that
No,
everybody that is watching now or will watch later will truly enjoy this. And please, guys, just continue to check back on our Master Motivation podcast. We got lots of cool guests coming up. Dwayne Spires is next week. We got Alan Belcher coming up. A lot of great guests that again I hope that you find some inspiration and motivation from. So, Mr. Perez, thank you so much for
thank
your
you,
time,
sir.
and
And
hope to run into you soon.
me too as well. Thank you for having me, sir.
All right, take care. Talk to you later.
Take it. Talk to you later.
All right, bye bye, guys.
Bye, sir.